Welcome to the J3 University podcast. Each week, we bridge the gap between science and in-the-trench experience for physique enhancement. I'm your host, John Jewett. Let class begin. Welcome, everyone. We are on the Coach's Corner. We have questions, and some will be kind of female specific, but it's definitely going to be generalized as well to males and have carryover. But have Cory Hagman and also Joseph Percher, our J3U coaches. Cory, you go first. How's it going?
It is going well. I am finishing my first semester of clinical rotations in nursing school, and I am still here. Still able to hit the gym. Although this month, I was gonna say before we hopped on, I think I've had like 25 days where I've been sick this month, which is absurd. Like I don't even remember what it's like. I'm gonna be so weak when I get back. Like it's just the whatever's going around. I mean, like the nose, throat, head, and I'm like, hey, I gotta just whenever I start to feel better, that's when I'll get back in the swing of things. But physique wise, like I still feel like I'm in a decent place considering training has been that irregular, which is always mentally hard. But outside of that, I mean, can't complain.
Does that like take a hit on your like workflow too? So I just work so slow when I'm sick.
Oh, I'm so yes. The cognitively, I'm um, very debilitated when I'm sick, and I think with school too, that makes it tough. But it's that lingering sickness where I'll feel better. Have one day I'll feel better, and I'll go out. I'll do like a walk outside, so not even something intense, and then I'll feel like shit the next day, and I'm like, well, okay, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were just talking about this with Joseph because Joseph's been sick, and we're talking about the deload. Like, hey, I'm sick. It'll be a deload. All good. It's convenient, right? So
Yeah.
Joseph, you're
It
like
didn't
kind of feeling better, but now we don't know.
it didn't work out like that. It didn't work out the way that I hoped. I kind of thought I would get like the two for the price of one. Like, hey, I'm kind of sick. I'm kind of backing away from everything. I'll just count this as a deload and then just come back right into it week one. And then here I am week two, and I'm all congested and somewhat sick again. And we were talking before. It seems like half of my clients, it feels like, have reported that they're sick this week, and I'm blaming all of them for putting it into my brain, and now I'm sick. But yeah, otherwise everything's been good. At the kind of the last push of off season, trying to slap on as much muscle as we can here before we pull down for like a pre-prep maintenance phase, and then I'll start prep for North Americans for next year. So in years past, and like as a younger athlete, I've definitely taken situations like this like my mental health has taken like a pretty sharp decline. If I needed to be away from the gym, it just feels like it all unravels when everything isn't on the money. But I guess helping as many people and talking people through like, hey, this is just one little phase. Like, we got to see the big picture here. It's okay. Like, I need you to get well and come back to the gym at 100%. So you say that to enough people, you have no choice but to start taking your own advice. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, fair enough. It's I'd say like as I've gone through more and more, like I was used to be so hell bent on like you don't miss the gym, like no matter what. Now it's like where it's like situational, like I could take a day off and I'm gonna be okay in the off season. Big picture, you hit like every single day, and that sounds like really soft now. We were just talking about that, Joseph, like how everyone like is a little softer these days, uh, but you realize as you get more advanced, like what matters and where it
Right.
won't matter as much. Like when you have that day off, and for probably like all of us, like we will train and drive ourselves into the ground, which is probably more of the problem. And having the extra day off is probably just a saving grace at that point. It's not like taking days off all the time. So I that's why I look forward to like deloads. I just take days off. That is my
Yeah.
more of my deload now. Um, train like 3 days, and I'm so looking forward to the off days by that time.
And then you get to the end of a string of like 3 or 4 dedicated rest days, and then you're like, man, I can't wait to get back to the gym. So you know you did it right when that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just started up a new block myself. So um put in a bit more like leg work too, which it's like I know you're like, why'd you do that? Like, why would you not do that?
Yeah.
Like everything, like everybody's been like improving well. Just haven't seen as much as what I want from my legs, and thinking about adding on a lot of tissue for doing an open show. It's
Yeah.
like I just want to be able to capitalize on the most mass that I could add. So I feel like with past injuries in my legs, like I also want to make sure I don't have any gaps that are present just from over time of being lower in volume. So
Did it come at the cost of having to dial anything else back, or just recovery capacity being like kind of peak off season? You're just able to do that.
Yeah, so I had 2 pull days, and so I moved some into that one of those pull sessions and pulled off a little bit of back work. So in that session, I put in an RDL and a rear foot elevated split squat. So it is pretty erector and glute heavy, which kind of fits like needs of what I want. I just want big glutes and erectors. But and then it like gives me a little bit more quad work in that day. Fits well with just like, yeah, it's an overall kind of back stimulus, but I still have like plenty of back work that takes place, and that day is still manageable. So but yeah, at the recovery point I'm at, like I can handle doing some bigger systemic lifts, and it's not that detrimental. So I shifted some of
Nice.
the accessory work to like my push days, which are shorter. So like rear delts got moved to push days, and so manage it that way.
Nice. Looking forward to seeing those tree trunks up there in the open next year.
Yeah. Well, cool. Let's dive into some questions. And who to kick it off?
I think it's fitting for Cory to kick it off.
I know we're so polite.
You
Proper
don't want to talk
gentleman.
about you don't want to talk about waist trainers? I thought that was the path you wanted to take.
Oh, I'll talk about them.
I feel like between the three of us, we've kind of covered that pretty heavily on our Instagram. So that would be like a real quick one. Globally, no, that's not something that we are a fan of, in the sense that it is not going to have the effect that clients tend to think it's going to have. So oftentimes it's marketed, hey, a waist trainer will shrink your waist. And in reality, it's really more of a compression device, even if we're talking about something on the more extreme side, like a corset. But we know in the market today, most of them are more just like sweat pads. They're just compression, just to create some actual heat. So if you're using something like that, and this, I get these questions all the time about waist training. If you're using one, just have very realistic expectations for what it will do. It will not shrink your waist. If you're wearing one of those squeams, like the what are they, nylon wraps? You're just creating heat, and that's fine if that's what you expect it to do. If you're wearing a corset, honestly, I've worn them. I've given it a fair shot. I did not achieve a smaller waist when I was actually wearing a waist trainer. This past season, I did not wear a waist trainer, and I was able to bring my waist in actually an additional 3/4 inches down. And that was from another year of practicing vacuum. So
I was just going to ask you, what was the secret? That it had to be vacuums, right?
vacuums, and something to mention there is to, vacuums, it's not going to change your structure. It is still something that is going to help with how you're able to control your abdomen. So naturally, if you have a very small waist, yes, you can in a way bring it down. But it's not, vacuums are not magical. Outside of it will help you control your waist. But I try to be super clear with that, because I know people, they're looking for that secret. And if you don't have a naturally small waist, or if that's something that you've gotten specific feedback on, you want to improve, then I think it's important to just be very, very honest about what can be done with waist training or with vacuums. But my recommendation for sure, do vacuums. You're not going to be worse for it. And on stage, I'm sorry, there's not a lot of people who were able to just hold that that super controlled, tight lower abdomen. There, very few people can hold that the entirety of when they're on stage. So unless that's you, unless you are just a master and can be on stage for 20 minutes and just keep it really controlled, you probably would benefit from doing them.
Yeah, it's with the waist trainers, it's not necessarily even training your waist. If anything, you're untraining your waist, because all those postural muscles that you need and for actually just waist control. So like training the transverse abdominal muscle, like it runs horizontally around the torso. So when you contract it, it does pull the waist in. Yeah, that's how, like in 2018, when I like really changed my waist, like it was dramatic, and it was vacuums. Like I was just able to like control my waist more. Like, how do you shrink your waist? It's like, I think I was just able to like control it more, and that changed the appearance and shape of it. But when I'm still in the off season, like it still is going to come out, and not have as much control. Like we see bigger bodybuilders and people give them shit like, oh, their belly's rounded out. Like they're, I don't still see it as a shrinking the waist, but continuing to keep control. I think a lot of these guys just lose control over time, never training that muscle. So yeah, it's definitely like, if you're going to change your waist on stage, like that would be the way to do it. And then I also was at North Americans when Renee competed in 2020, and I saw, no judgment, but I'm pretty sure they're men's physique guys, because I don't know, that's what I'm going to put on them. And they were wearing their t-shirts, and they had their waist trainers on top of their t-shirts. And right when I saw that, exactly, if you see Joseph's face right now, that's exactly it. I was like, no, like hell no, like it's unacceptable. So it's like, can never wear one just because of that fact. So anyway, humor about it.
I will say one thing, it can keep you mindful of that, especially like,
Fair enough. Yeah.
like it can keep you, like I had a prep that I wore one, and it it just made me mindful to basically, I just sat in an office out all day and contracted my abs, like held my abs firm against it the whole time, and it worked. Now if I would have just wrapped my waist up and just sat there and not been mindful of it, it's not going to do anything.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And then I think food too, like food and digestion is just such a huge part of it. Like if your digestion is poor, or even if your digestion's in a decent spot, like we're, with a lot of bigger bodybuilders, like it's kind of inevitable. Like if you're just putting on or putting in a ton of food, you have to be mindful of it. Like I think of examples of, I have some guys that are eating 5,000 calories. Like if your waist is just uncontrolled and just loose all day, and it's just expanding all day, every day, as you fill it with food and water, like, yeah, it's going to be tough to rope that back in. Even if you're peeled, skinned out, it's going to be tough to reel that back in. So I think, it's like anything else, especially in this industry. People want a quick fix that requires mindless, no effort, no work. It's like, no, like this could be a tool if you're mindful of it and there's effort behind it. But if you just wrap your midsection up, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I promise I'm not going to go on a tangent here, but John, I took that freediving course, and
Oh yeah.
so we, the thing I struggled most with was the belly breathing. And it was because like the instructor, he's like, show me like how. I'm like, no, I do vacuums, like I got this. And he's like, no, like you need to breathe with your stomach. And like I really do think like from the years, it's not been like 10 years, it's been like legit maybe a year and a half of consistently like holding vacuums. And really it's a lot of rib expansion, but it's really just for my own mind muscle connection to control my TVA. I had so much I could not do what this guy was asking me to do. I was like, I mentally I'm trying to unlearn years of like learning vacuums. And I'm like trying to explain it to him, like, I don't think you get this. Like I've been doing like 10, 20 rounds like daily consistently. Like I can do like 10 minutes of them. And he's like, no, you see, you need to do the opposite. I'm like, literally won't be able to. It's impossible in an afternoon. But yeah, definitely do your vacuums. They will pay off.
Just so everybody caught, like Cory said, free dive, which is crazy. Jump in as good, swim down as deep as you can without no tank or anything, and then try to make it back up. So nutty, right?
I don't fuck with the water, period. So that sounds like another universe to me.
Yeah.
No.
So
I'll I think we hit waist trainers pretty hard, so that eliminates like 20% of the questions. But
yeah, we might have
no,
just put a handful of businesses out of commission, but that's all right.
I'm gonna get some emails after this. I know.
Well, there was
you guys, which ones did y'all want to hit next?
Yeah, I have it on my mind, so I like this one. It's like, will exogenous estrogen and progesterone inhibit my growth? I know you came across this question, Cory. Was there any other context to it, or just in general?
She was referring to birth control, and she didn't specify which one. However, I know we had one of my clients. This was a reference that I had asked you. I think last month we had gone pretty deep into this, and you uncovered some really good information around it.
Okay. Yeah. The research, at least around birth control, is tough because a lot of the like larger studies with hormonal birth control gets lumped into one, and so they don't separate it out by whether there's like 4 different types of generations of progestins, and each one has a different level of androgenicity that presents. But then there's also ethinyl estradiol, the estrogen component. So you have these 2 components, but the one can have like 4 different kinds. Then there's also different delivery systems and different phases that they'll have. So they'll have like one monophasic, it stays the same all month, right? The same amount of hormones. They'll have one that's biphasic that has like a bump, trying to mimic how the normal hormone changes are from the menstrual cycle. You'll have like triphasic, there's quadphasic. Then it has even delivery system differences, right? So it could be oral, or there's like the Depo-Provera shots. Then you have the intravaginal, device as well. So it's like, and a lot of those just get lumped together in the studies. So, but individually they all can work different. So it's tough when you're looking at some of the research around it, and could get a bit convoluted. But I have to just say, like, in general, for hormonal birth control, you are putting in an exogenous hormone. So it's actually very similar to if you're using like an anabolic steroid. Like this is really, for a lot of females, your first exposure to exogenous hormones. And just like you've already taken a steroid in a sense. And so they have like some crossover effects when you're looking at mechanisms of suppressing the HPO axis, so the hypopituitary ovarian axis. So you're simply trying to castrate someone from producing their own hormones so they don't go through their normal menstrual cycle and ovulate, so they don't get pregnant, basically. Now, with suppressing your own production of hormones by taking birth control, it also suppresses testosterone. And that is the main problematic component for the physique competitor. And around it would cause more issues with muscle mass accrual. The body fat issue isn't quite as clear because there's some research showing like birth control doesn't affect it at all. Then depending on the type of birth control, it can really affect it and make it more challenging. Some women gain a bunch of weight. Some people don't gain any weight. So it's kind of all over the board depending on the type and how that person responds, which I know that isn't very clear because it's not very clear. But I would say that what is a bit more direct is the effects on testosterone being low and that being impactful for building muscle. And also you see those oral birth control, an increase in sex hormone binding globulin, so you have less free testosterone. You also have an increase in thyroid binding globulin, so you have less free thyroid action. So it's not really in favor at all for metabolic or muscle building effects for females using birth control. Now, with that being said, I know I just asked about exogenous estrogen and progesterone. We deal a lot with females going in through hypothalamic amenorrhea. It's super common in the females that we coach, where you go on prep and stress, the rigors of prep, low body fat causes hormones to shut down as well. And low estrogen, low progesterone, very similar to even like having a menopausal female, low estrogen, low progesterone. And there's a lot of long-term health issues around it because I've had females that they don't have a menstrual cycle for years competing because they're just need to stay low body fat and they just keep competing. And the issue for one is long-term health consequences around low estrogen. And this is the same, like could be for men as well, because estrogen is just such a protective hormone for one brain. So it could be increased risks for dementia, cardiovascular disease for females. Bone density is huge. And those years where you have those ovulatory menstrual cycles and high estradiol is where you really lay down good bone density. So you totally miss out on these years, which could be problematic for osteoporosis later in life. And then there's issues more acutely like around like libido function, mood. And then we even talk about the muscle aspects. So with having low estrogen and low progesterone, think about in contest prep, when your hormones are low, your ability to build muscle is garbage. Like it's not a state to build muscle. So if you think about low hormones are not conducive to building muscle, not that conducive to body fat gain, either, so really like the use of exogenous estradiol and progesterone could very well be justified in those females that are going low hormones in those states to preserve that beneficial hormonal environment. And there was a cool study done with, and I'll say the studies on this stuff is hard to come by. You're not going to find like contest prep females, hypothalamic amenorrhea, getting hormone replacement, because the normal approach is just reverse the stress. If they're exercising too much, get them to exercise less, feed them more, and it will reverse. But we're in situations where we have females that are like going right back through the rigors of prep, and it makes sense to almost keep a baseline of hormones present. And we look at it for like a muscle building perspective. There's the studies in menopausal women because it kind of translates well. It's females that are going to be in low hormone state. And in this study, they took 80 females and they gave them, this was oral estradiol and progesterone, and they separate them out. They had an exercise group, an HRT group, exercise plus HRT, or just control. And they were looking at, and they trained them, this was over 12 weeks, and they looked at changes in the cross-sectional area of the thigh, and also they looked at body composition too for fat changes. The exercise plus HRT group had the largest increase in cross-sectional area of the thigh. It was like the exercise group, I think it was around 6% change. The HRT plus exercise was nope. I take that back. Exercise was 2%, HRT was 6%, and the exercise plus HRT was 7%. So even HRT had a more effect than even the exercise alone. Body fat increase was only in the control group. So exercise group, HRT group, and exercise plus HRT had no body fat gain. So we're looking at estradiol supplementation in a group of females that had really low, and it showed improvements in muscle mass accrual and preventing body fat gain. That's huge. Like this is clearly a beneficial anabolic hormone to have proper estradiol levels present. So in certain situations for females, like if you're getting into prep and these levels are coming down, makes a lot of sense that we want to optimize your natural hormone environment to ride that out for prep. I think you'll have better outcomes. And I've used this in females that I've coached, and by no means, I know estrogen usually gets blamed as like the body fat gainer, the negative hormone, and by no means, like these girls get peeled and they feel the best that they have on prep. And when your estrogen get low, like everything, like your hair gets worse, your skin, joints. So like it helps for one, like just a lot of those aspects, but also like the muscle building effects, retentive effects. And I think it will aid body fat loss as well.
Absolutely. No, I think you covered just every aspect of that. Which
I know.
Sorry,
that was like super long-winded about it, but so yeah, it's kind of like depends on which exogenous hormone are using, and they you kind of weigh out, because there is studies looking at giving birth control to females that have hypothalamic amenorrhea, and like what's the worst situation, like having a low hormone environment or having a synthetic exogenous hormone. And even ethinyl estradiol, the synthetic, it would help preserve bone mass, but still like that wouldn't be the ideal route to do. Like with oral birth control or just oral estrogen in general, there is lower conversion of GH to IGF-1, which is what you want for also laying down good bone mass. But hell, for a physique athlete, that's what you want too, for muscle mass and for body fat. So having like a more of a transdermal estradiol would be more ideal. That way you prevent that first pass from the liver. But that I know that was a lot around the topic. It's just an area that's not spoken on much, and there's not a lot of information around too, because it is really convoluted. So you don't have a lot of people that dive in, and even if you dive in the literature, again, it's very mixed. So you just have to rely on a bit of what you can pull from the literature, and also just coaching application for you work with females. So that's where you have to draw a lot of these conclusions. It's a lot of the area that we work in too, right? It's not clear in research, and it has to be a lot of observational experience where we apply what we learn.
Absolutely. And I think listeners will appreciate how you delivered that, because it does answer a question that I get constantly, and that I see is not well answered across the space. And having some form of birth control is definitely a concern for a lot of women who are competing, even if they do want to have kids later on in life, even if they already have kids. And I think just having information around, hey, like, how do I actually weigh this out and weigh out the benefits and the risk of having using a birth control pill versus having maybe a non-hormonal form of protection. I can say for myself, having stable levels of test, I think, has done the most for me in bodybuilding. Like, it would really, really, I think, shock people what they can do from a hypertrophy standpoint, just having stable levels. And I mean, at this point, I've been on TRT for almost a year, and the most growth happened when I was not in prep and when I was consistently in a normal to high range. And I think that's where a lot of people do shoot themselves in the foot, because they're focused on, well, I need to bring my estrogen down. That's what's holding up my ability to build, or it's holding up my prep. It's, estrogen, estradiol is that hormone that's the issue. And in reality, it's like, well, hey, have you looked at your test? Like, have you even considered how low or non-existent test is affecting your bodybuilding? Because I mean, you're going in and out of prep, and we see this constantly where women do want to actively compete, and they approach it like, hey, I'll take care of my hormones in that 6-month period in between preps. And it's like, yeah, but you're going to prep, and 6 months from now, you're going to be in the exact same place. And I mean, really, how much work can we do in that off season? It's not really conducive for that individual's goals. So I think being able to offer advice that really lays out like, hey, here's your long-term aspirations. Here is a consistent problem that will impede progress on both ends. So what's the appropriate action? Yeah, I think listeners will really like that.
Yeah, it's tough to sometimes get people on board with that message, especially with, testosterone, but it definitely is very much impacted in just dieting, but even a lot of females using hormonal birth control and seeing that suppressed like less than that, like 20 nanogram per deciliter mark. I mean, think about it, if you bring up a female just to even mid norm levels, like that's 3-4 times the level she was at. That can be substantial for a female to make improvements in the way that you feel. And even around, estrogen too, because there's a fear around that too. And we were just had someone asking about fat around the hips and thighs, and it's estrogen related, right? And I had to dig in a little deeper on that, because estrogen in general, it increases lipolysis in fat cells, but around this like more thigh fat hip area, there's actually a desensitization to estrogen on the fat cell. So it's actually not estrogen that's causing the issue. It's more of like there's a inflammatory state that's present, or could be more around even insulin resistance that's preventing estradiol from taking its action to cause lipolysis around those areas. So if you have females that have this greater deposition of body fat in that area, it's not estrogen to attack. It's what's causing more of the issues around estrogen desensitization. So that's a whole other rabbit hole. But point being here is that not to fear these things, and just to educate yourself, because they are both routes to bring about more progress for your physique.
Yeah, absolutely. Joseph,
and next question.
That was a masterclass, guys. Jeez,
that was deep. I was like in it, and I was like, man, I don't know how to stop. Just go.
You get this look in your eye where you're just like going in the zone. Yeah,
it's been on my mind. So
yeah, no, and it's super valuable. I mean, like you said, there's not good, reliable information. Like there's not many people even taking the time to dive into this. So super valuable. But moving on, one of the things that I get asked, and I wanted to talk about. So I don't help many females, but all the females that I do help want to be wellness. Everybody loves wellness now. And so with that, there's very specific goals outlined with the physique that you're looking for. Like they want dominant legs. They want the legs to be the centerpiece of everything that you're going to display, and almost like an underdeveloped upper body, like that comparatively. So, when programming for somebody with goals like this, you have to really be specific with how you're programming. So a lot of the wellness ladies that I help, if their recovery capacity allows for it, we're going to train legs 3 days a week. And then depending on where they are and again, it's context dependent. So if someone already has dominant legs, maybe there's more room to have a balanced split. But, let's just say the average person, kind of a blank canvas, comes to me and they want to transform into wellness. We need to hammer your legs. And we talk about this all the time, like having a recovery budget where you can only allot so much of that recovery budget to each day of the week. And so no question, if you're training with adequate volume and intensity, one leg day is going to be where you spend more of that recovery budget than anywhere else. Now you're talking about doing it 3 times in a week. Well, then you really need to scale back everything else. Because if let's say you have, 100 units or $100 of a recovery budget, and each one of your leg days is 30 of those dollars, like you don't have much left to play with if you're going to do this 3 times. So a lot of times, again, it is individually dependent, but you program those 3 leg days. A lot of times I'm only having like one upper body day where there's just a little bit of everything up top sprinkled in, because that's really all you can recover from. If you try to put somebody on 3 full leg days and then have them go in and do a full pull day and then go in and do a full push day, a lot of times they're just going to be buried and they're not going to recover. So you're kind of going to defeat the purpose. So, and we'll get to how this can be correlated to everybody, male, female, regardless of what division you're in. But I think that should be the thought process, where it's like, whatever the main priority is for the desired physique, that's where you need to put a lot of your time and attention. The volume, all these different things need to be programmed towards that. And then if it means scaling back on other body parts, well, then so be it. And then even with male competitors, for in a good example, like I have a couple of guys that originally came to me as men's physique competitors, and they want to grow into classic, or they want to continue to grow and hopefully get into bodybuilding. And it's like, okay, well then we need to hammer your legs. Now, those male divisions that I mentioned are not so heavily favored in terms of lower body dominance. So the split and the programming doesn't need to be as heavily in favor of training legs. I'm not going to put somebody that wants to be a classic physique competitor on 3 leg days and then only 1 upper body day where everything gets 2 sets and then you move on. That just doesn't make sense. But programming, the big takeaway is just programming for the priority. We've talked about it, even whether it's with legs or whether it's a different body part, but with legs specifically, it costs so much, so to speak, that you really have to set up your entire week around recovering from those leg days. Because if we're talking training legs 3 out of 7 days, that next leg day is going to hit you like a ton of bricks, and it's coming soon. Like you can only have maybe 1 or 2 days in between you needing to train legs again. So that's where working hand in hand with a coach and really being honest and communicating with a coach about your lifestyle and your habits and your sleep, all these different things. The whole big picture needs to revolve around recovering and coming back from those leg days. So a lot of times, if you can, it's like you work with the client to figure out when their days off from work are, or when their days off from school are, or when they have days that they can just kind of hang out. Like, for the average person that works a 9-to-5 job Monday through Friday, it probably makes sense to have one of those big leg days on Saturday, but then have a complete day off on Sunday so that you can kind of recharge and get ready for the entire week. So I think it just takes some digging as a coach and some communication, both from the coach and the client, to really figure out how the priority and what needs to be trained most fits into their life and the whole big picture. So, like I was saying, there's definitely some takeaways there that's not just female specific. Like if you are trying to grow from men's physique to classic, it probably makes sense to train your legs twice a week. And then, so where else do you dial back? You try to find then on that person and on that person's physique, you try to identify their best body part, their biggest strength. And that's inevitably going to be where it makes sense to pull from. So, if it happens to be somebody's back, well, that's a day that costs a lot of your recovery budget as well. So you can dial that back, and then it leaves you some spare change, so to speak, to fill in for those leg days. So, I could talk about this. I feel like I could talk about programming and just the different scenarios, like for hours on end. But I'll let you guys chime in.
Yeah.
Coach John, nobody better to talk about it than you, with the way that you've programmed Renee's training.
I was like, I'm terrible for leg training because like that's like my strong suit. But I know for Renee, all I do is smash her on legs. Which yeah, I had a question in the forum that came up. It's on the very similar topic. There was someone brand new to training and wants to compete in wellness, and they're asking, would you still go with the full body setup, or how would you modify that around their aspirations for wellness? So they have a division need that they have to meet, but there's also has a baseline of no way to assess the response yet either. Anyone have thoughts around that?
I do, yes. So with female athletes, I think a lot of times when you're starting out as a beginner, first off, I'm not going to ever discourage someone from doing wellness, even if they don't have the muscularity. If you're starting out, you want to do wellness because that's where your heart is, cool. I'll be your biggest cheerleader. I will see that out for you. But there is a conversation that's going to happen at the beginning that's like, hey, I think you would be better suited for bikini because frankly, no one's showing up as a beginner with that muscularity, with those needs. They're just not. And it's okay that you might have outside external validation that says, hey, like this is the division for you. But when we're talking about programming, I think the specificity needs to be appropriate for the individual's experience and training history. So if someone is brand new out the gates, we do need to have a balanced split. And if they're dead set on, hey, I want to do wellness, okay, well, yeah, we'll throw some extra volume there, but the split is not going to look like Renee's or any other top pro. I mean, it's not appropriate. And at the same time, too, dedicating that kind of volume to someone before they're really ready for it or need it, you then run the risk of having so much of a gap between body parts that I think is important to have when building that foundation when you're just starting out. A lot of times with beginners, I think the specificity, it needs to be pretty low. And people don't like that. People don't like hearing, hey, I don't get a highly specialized program for me. And it's like, no, there are things that work. There's a lot of overlap, but like, you don't need to not train X, Y, and Z the way a top athlete is going to, or an athlete who's been training 20 years. So I think when it comes to volume allocation, for one, if the foundation isn't there, that's where we start. And the way you build a foundation is pretty universal. And that's one of those hard conversations you have with the client. Hey, I want to train legs 3 days a week, and I want to have all the glute volume, and I don't want to do 5 body parts. Hey, if you stick with it and you get to the point where you don't need that, if you're committed to training for the purpose of competing, well then yeah, you'll get to that point where it will be more specialized. But for the time being, the foundation needs to be built. And it kind of goes to what you've always said, John, with goal setting, that you really need to ask yourself, hey, everything in your program, is it oriented around that number one goal? You can't have 5 number one goals. So you gotta pick that one you want to focus on, and it's okay if it changes, but everything should complement that. It should be conducive for seeing that goal out. And that might mean not having this highly specialized program that is specific, like in the way that you're thinking it should be.
Yeah, you don't want to be an advanced lifter when you're week 1 of your program, because advanced lifters don't grow fast. That sucks.
So they don't grow fast, and it takes them a ton to squeak out 1% progress. So it's like, give them as little as it might take. You don't know. In that scenario where it's somebody that's brand new, you don't know. You might have awesome genetic response for legs, and you might grow on 6 working sets across the week. So it's like, why am I going to go in and do 30? Because then where do you go from there? If you go in and do 30 and you're going to make some awesome progress, no doubt. But then what? You're going to do 40? You're going to do 50 cents? Like, what are we talking about? So it's like, I think that's one thing you've always talked about too, John, is like minimum effective dose for everything, whether it's food, drugs, training volume. Like, why would I put you on 15 sets if 5 might grow your legs right now?
Yeah, you want to work 20 hours a week and make $1,000, or 40 hours a week and make $1,000.
Right.
Like, we can only grow so fast. Like, you're just trying to work harder for the same result that's going to bury you too, right? So yeah, I agree. Like, as a beginner, it takes just a little stimulus to get a growth response. So it won't take a lot per session, and you can do high frequency. And also, you don't know the response to that person yet, like you said, Joseph. So I think the full body split still makes sense for anyone across division until you can see that response. I do think you can take that full body split though, and through exercise choices and order, maybe put a little emphasis for the person, especially psychologically, if they, catered well within that. But even for bikini wellness, you need some degree of upper body development. So, I think you could have maybe 2 full body sessions that started with legs, ended with upper, maybe have one that starts with upper and ends with lower. And now you technically could get that client, hey, you're on a lower body specialization, right? To have the selling point there, that it is specialized for them. And hey, you're going to grow so easy right now. Let's take advantage of these full body workouts. So it's just framing it right. But yeah, I think like y'all all said, it's get the most from the least, and you don't need to get highly specialized just yet. Follow up for you, Joseph, because you brought up once it is needed to allocate some volume from other parts to lower body, have you found a better way of like dispersing that throughout the week? Of like, is it 3 leg days, quad, ham, glute across? Is it better to have quad 1, ham 1, or what seems more ideal?
Yeah, man, you knew like this was going to just send me down a rabbit hole. You're like, let me just feed this to him and then he's going to go off on it. But I think it is just person dependent again. And so it's like we slap this label on it like legs, but it's like, man, is it quads? Is it hamstrings? Is it glutes? So I think it depends too within that individual person. Like, there are some girls that have killer quads, but then they have almost no hamstring and glute. So there might be, in that scenario, there might be a little bit of all of it sprinkled in, but maybe one day where she's going to do the majority of her quad volume, but then 2 of those days are like almost exclusively hamstring and glutes. Or one specific example of a girl that I'm helping right now, just as a personal goal, she wants to have a muscular looking back. Like, she wants to, wear open dresses in the back and all these different things, but she wants to be wellness. So it's like, for that girl, there's a day where she does kind of a modified pull day that includes some of these movements that there's overlap from the back to the glutes to the hamstrings. So I think it just depends based on the person and what their goals are. What have I seen best? Depends. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the broad thought process on it. I think being able to spread it out over 3, because you're going to get into volumes where if you're only doing 2 of those days and you're smashing in all this volume on 2 days, that's going to be a lot of fatigue to come back from. And then I also worry about the quality of the work near the end of those sessions. Whereas if you split them across 3, let's just throw some arbitrary numbers at it. Like if you were to do, let's just say 12 working sets for legs total. And it's like, I would probably rather split that across 3 to where there's 4 working sets across 3, because all 4 of those sets, all 3 days are going to be of a much higher quality than doing 12 on one day, or even 6 2 days. 6 2 days isn't terrible in that example. But I have seen, even with other body parts and not just female specific, but it does seem like, and I don't know that there's much research to back this, especially within our demographic, but it does seem like frequency, the more often that you can do it, as long as you can recover from it, I tend to lean towards that.
Yeah, I think on that note, like volume equated, like you look at those studies, like training frequency, it doesn't make much difference, but the increased frequency is allowing more volume to occur. So if you had it like,
right,
hey, we want to max out volume for you guys, like let's see how far we can push it, the one day a week person's going to get buried. And the other day on like multi-frequency is going to be able to carry that out more efficiently. So that's you're right, like that is the benefit of the frequency. What I've come across, like, so I've been programming this like out the gate with wellness. You're like, how do you make a wellness? That's when it all came out. What do you even do for wellness? Like for Renee, how do you train glutes every day? But is that there,
and especially Renee, because she's pretty well developed up top too. So it was like an interesting challenge.
There's a lot of axial loading with the movements that would build glutes. Like you almost have to load something on the back and get the hips far from that line of force. RDLs, glute bridges, back squats, split squats, like they're all load the spine a lot, which create a lot of systemic fatigue. So what I found, like with that training frequency, is trying to have one day where there's no axial loading, but we can still like train hams, quads, glutes. So that might be like looking like, hey, see the leg curl, leg press, and
extensions.
Yeah, stuff like that. More like abduction work, or it's something really low taxing, like that's where we do like cable kickback day. So you have one day that's just not so systemically bearing for someone, then we could like spread out the other days that have more loading across. And I mean, Cory, we probably ask you because this is what you do. We don't even do it. We're just making all this shit up.
Yeah, we're just making it up.
People are doing great. I need to take notes. No, I completely agree, and I think it's, I think having an ABC, like leg split, that's what I've run. I mean, John, I started that when I hired you for training, like training coaching, and I've been on that split since then. So I mean, like again, we're going over a year now, and like the growth I've seen on that amount of volume, with a very similar, like I've modified things as I've needed to, but it, I really, really like the delegation day to day, where one day is slightly more quad focused, one day is hamstring, and then the other it's glutes, but it's more of a, I don't even want to call it a back off day because that term will get convoluted into something else. It's still 20 sets for the day. I mean, it's hard, but systemically, not having your lower back under that kind of strain. I think it really does set me up going into the next week, because I have that leg C, and typically that upper day that's following leg C, because I do split my upper into in between my legs B and C, and then after my leg C, that upper day is light as well. So I, in a way, have 2 recovery days before I hit legs A. Legs A is the most taxing system.
Legs A sounds like the gauntlet. Yeah.
But legs B is where I do RDLs. So it's like,
Okay.
I like having that kind of breakdown, because it really does allow me to get the most out of a week. But that's how I like to look at it, out of a week. And I mean, a lot of my focus is around glutes, not so much legs. But you really don't want to push past what's necessary, because again, it's like you don't get extra credit for just doing extra sets. Like there's a point where you're actually hindering your progress. So yeah, both you guys, y'all nailed that. And I mean, like, I hope, I know listeners will like that kind of breakdown around movement selection.
Glad to get the seal of approval there. That's nice.
Well, right on. I think we're coming up right past the hour, so we had some great questions and nailed them. So we can wrap it up there. I appreciate y'all for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. Always nice speaking with both of you.
I know we tried to have this one be a little bit more female specific, because what is coming out December 13th will be the female module. And that will be really excited about it. It's been a long time coming, but it'll be very comprehensive. I think the most comprehensive education coaching course that's out there for females, from taking you through like understanding all these hormone, I didn't want to call them crazy hormones, but it is crazy like how much you have to know about all these fluctuations, to then understand like the disruptions that happen and what that means for, you know, muscle mass, physique, and getting to stage. What do you do about it? How do you read the labs for all this? And then implementing even PDs around all the hormones, derangement that occur, and putting that into a structured off-season prep. And how do you peak females? So Luke and I have done a lot of work on it, and it's going to be phenomenal. So really excited to get everybody to check it out. But anyway, everybody have a good night, and we'll talk to you next time.